Have you ever tried making collage artwork? I haven't, but I've always wanted to. Today I'm finally going to give it a try. In this video, I'll walk you through my art process and share what worked well and what I would do differently next time. My plan is to create 2 colorful flower collage art pieces. I made several different versions of what I thought would look nice, and in the end I chose these 2 flower sketches. One with a single large flower and another that resembles a meadow filled with lots of tiny flowers. I outline all the elements of the sketch that need to be cut. I'm using a regular thin printer paper, and unfortunately this was a mistake I had to correct later. A future me decided to make some paint tests and then opted for a slightly heavier watercolor paper instead. So I had to recut quite a few paper parts again. Here, I outline all the leaves, branches, and flower petals. And then I will cut out each element with a precision knife. I am using an X-acto craft knife and carefully cut out all the elements one by one. There are some pencil marks here and there, but that's okay. I will carefully remove them later with a soft eraser. It's important to make sure that the knife blade is new and sharp because this will help to keep the paper edges more crisp. I prefer to cut everything by hand, but you can also choose to outsource the work to a paper cutting machine or a plotter. This will save a lot of time on cutting, especially if you want to make multiple copies or your artwork. All the cutting is done, and now I have 2 sets of white silhouettes ready to be painted. I've also cut a few additional leaves and flowers as spares, just in case. Having so many different parts layered together will give my artwork a slight 3-dimensional effect I'm looking for. Now it's time to add some color. For this project, I will be using gouache paints. I like gouache because it is water-based paint, so it allows me to control how concentrated or soft I want my colors to be. I paint the main elements of my collage first, and then we'll move to smaller details later. Knowing what my most important color is will help me to choose my complementary colors better. In this case, because my main flower is yellow, I will choose turquoise blue and cold green for my leaves and branches. This should create a nice color contrast between the elements. When painting, I try to mix colors together so I can create more complex tones. For instance, instead of painting this leaf in a single green color, I add a bit of blue paint on one end and a bit of sage or even orange on the other. I carefully blend the colors together to make a smooth transition. This way I get more interesting color combinations. And this approach also gives me more variety in tone and color contrast, which I like a lot. I try to color all the elements of one type before moving to the next one. So I will first color all the flower petals, then all the leaves, then branches, berries, and so on. This helps me stay organized and keep track of all the parts that need to be painted. I color flower stems and branches in the same color as the leaves. I added just a bit of darker tones, which hopefully will create more contrast, but will still fit well together with the rest of the flower. I chose to paint berries in bright red to add a pop of color. After that, I checked all the parts I painted and added extra details where needed. I put a second coat of paint on the leaves to make them look folded, added a thin, bright orange border to the flower, and painted black seeds to include in the center of the flower for added detail. After a few hours, when all the paint is dry, I gently iron each piece to ensure it's perfectly flat before gluing everything together. This will make the gluing part easier and hopefully will make the final collage picture look better. I prefer to iron my painted collage paper at a relatively low temperature to avoid burning it. I also place my paper in between paper towels to reduce the risk of damage. Longer strips of paper, like stems and branches, seem to warp more, so I iron them a bit longer than the smaller pieces. When all the collage parts are ready, I safely store them aside in a small tray dish and start painting the second flower. I repeat the same steps I used for painting the yellow flower, starting with the main elements first, and then moving to smaller details. I chose bright blue for the flowers, warm green for the leaves, and terracotta brown for the branches. I added a dark border to the flower petals and some extra shading to the leaves to create more interesting patterns. I decided to leave the seeds in the middle of the flower white to create extra contrast with the dark blue petals. I let the paint dry for a few hours, and then I gently ironed each paper piece to ensure everything is as flat as possible. All the paper pieces are ready, so now it's time to start gluing everything together. This is my favorite part because I finally get to see the picture I've been working toward come together. I'm using regular wood glue, which sticks well to the paper and leaves hardly any marks. However, I'm still cautious and use only a small amount to avoid any visible glue in the final result. I start by putting the main flowers together, layering the petals, and adding the black seeds around the flower's center, and then assemble all the small red berries. This way I make sure that all my tiny paper elements are glued and not lost. Then I arrange everything together in a final layout. This lets me see if the composition looks good or if I need to move some branches or leaves around. Once I'm happy with the layout, I start gluing everything together. I work branch by branch, starting with the smaller elements and moving to the larger ones. It's a very slow but relaxing process, and the result is worth it. While putting everything together, I felt like I was still missing some details. So I added a few tiny white light reflections to the red berries. You'll see them in the final collage picture in a bit. Once everything was glued together, I added a bit of transparent tape to all the major glue points in the collage, which should provide some additional support to the picture. And just like that, the first flower is ready. Now it's time to work on the blue meadow flowers. Here, I follow the exact same process as with the yellow flower. I start by gluing all the tiny flower parts together to form bigger elements. Then I create a layout of the picture I'm about to glue, and once I'm happy with the composition, I glue everything together. I'd like to frame and keep these two collage artworks for myself and make some small postcard-sized prints to share with friends and family. So when both collage artworks were ready, I took high-quality photos of each one in good daylight. I used Photoshop to remove the background and made some slight edits to fix imperfections I found. Once I was happy with the pictures, I sent them to my local print shop. The prints turned out a bit more saturated than I hoped, but I'm still very happy with the results. This was my first attempt at making collage artworks and turning them into prints. I enjoyed this creative process a lot, and I hope you enjoyed watching me paint and glue everything together. If you've been thinking about trying collage work, I hope this inspired you to give it a go. I find it a very relaxing form of art that requires very little materials and allows for lots of creative exploration. Happy crafting, until next time.